Welcome to Honoring Black History. I'm Al Waters.
And I'm Angelica Morrison.
And I'm Jazz Williams. It's Black History Month, and News 4 is sharing stories of African Americans from all over Western New York.
The roots of African American culture run deep in our region. And over the next 30 minutes, we'll be highlighting the many contributions African Americans are making in our community.
We're here at the Nash House, which is located along the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor. It was the home of Reverend J. Edward Nash. And later in our special, we'll take you inside and show you how it's providing a snapshot of the early 20th century and a look into the life of one of the most influential voices in Buffalo's African American community. It's been months since the racial justice protests broke out across the nation and right here in Western New York. And now local activists and community leaders are looking toward the future at what's next for the Black community. Niagara Square, which was the site of many racial justice protests over the summer months, is now quiet. Snow and ice has replaced the protesters that sometimes camped out at the square for days.
Just because the weather is cold, you don't hear any more Black Lives Matter. You don't hear no protesting going on. These issues are still occurring across national America.
Holman is the executive director of the Stop the Violence Coalition and a member of the Buffalo Peacemakers. He says going forward after months of protests, the focus should be zeroed in on the violence in the Black community.
You know, you can't say Black Lives Matter and we out here shooting each other.
Since the start of the new year, Buffalo police say there's been at least 30 shootings. Most recently, a woman in her 70s was shot while sitting in her living room watching TV.
You know, we didn't hear Black Lives Matter coming into the neighborhood when black folks was killing black folks. We had a bunch of homicides happen during that protest. We didn't see them march through Martin Luther King Park or through areas saying that, you know, John was just murdered.
DeJohn Hall is a local activist. He participated in many of the protests last year.
The work that we saw this summer was really not a reaction of George Floyd, but more so a reaction of what was going on here in Buffalo, whether it be the murder of Marcus Neal, Jose Hernandez Rossi. This is not a fad. We're just doing the work, you know, and it's not going to be in the streets during the cold months. It's going to be on Zoom in front of our Common Council.
Hull says the issue of violence in the Black community is important, but going forward, the focus needs to be on policy change.
Right now, folks have been actively testifying in front of the Common Council, whether it be at the Police Oversight Committee hearings or other hearings, on a whole host of solutions that were brought forth not just over the summer, but from years prior.
Last year was a pivotal year for change in the city of Buffalo.
There was a feeling almost all across the world that systemic racism was a problem. We were able to initiate a number of reforms in the city of Buffalo that the activist community wanted to see. We repealed 15 fees and fines. We established a system of stop receipts.
Going forward, Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown expects more changes on the horizon.
The disproportionate death toll of the coronavirus reminds us that Black Americans have a long, uncomfortable history with the medical community.
Now, civic leaders in Western New York are discovering we all pay the price when medicine is practiced unequally, so they're taking steps to level the playing field. A pop-up clinic for COVID-19 vaccinations administered by Catholic Health, designed to get the medicine into the arms of African Americans and other local folks in Lackawanna.
We need more vaccines to come into our communities. Not only that, but to serve the health communities as well.
The state set up dozens of these pop-up clinics across New York in response to a blatant COVID-19 medical contradiction. A disproportionate number of blacks and Latinos are contracting and dying from the virus. Too few are being inoculated. Why? Community leaders cite a basic mistrust between blacks and medicine, which prompted Governor Cuomo to take action last month.
Yes, the Black community in particular has reasons to be skeptical. Yes, there's racism. Yes, there's discrimination.
And would say that racism, as the AMA has said and as we say today, is a public health threat and a public health emergency.
The Buffalo Common Council joined health professionals and the African American Health Equity Task Force to take a stand against racism as an urgent threat to public health, and that it's critical to get the COVID vaccine to doctors and health centers that serve communities of color.
These are the areas in which people are comfortable. People know their doctors. They just won't go to just CVS or Rite Aid. They want to go to their doctor, their physician, the person they trust.
The task force, in partnership with ECMC, points out vaccine hesitancy only plays a small role in the health disparities between whites, blacks, and other minorities.
If we get the information or get the vaccines to these people who are dealing with folks in our community or already providing health care, they would be the ones that would be able to develop a plan to distribute the vaccines to those who are most in need.
The task force is among those calling for a complete overhaul of the way healthcare is delivered, because they say COVID-19 is just another symptom of the disparities between racial and ethnic groups.
We are looking at people dying from asthma and the other COPD spectrum. We have those health disparities in the African American community 3, 4, 5 times more than the greater community.
Pointer says the task force is showing there is a better way of delivering the COVID vaccine. It's just a matter of getting it here.
What we know is there will be arms to put vaccinations in, but we need vaccination, and we're praying.
Coming up next, how one Western New York woman is raising awareness and creating a safe space for survivors of human trafficking. Human trafficking is a major problem, not just in our country, but in the world. So I caught up with one native Western New Yorker who's bringing awareness to it in a major way. In 2008, much like the rest of the world, Kelly Diane Galloway was captivated by a movie starring Liam Neeson called Taken. Although it was dramatized, the film urged for a serious conversation to be had about human trafficking. Kelly's interest was further piqued when she did a deep dive into her own family history and discovered that she was only the 3rd generation of Black people in her family to be born free. This discovery drove her to create Project Mona's House, a movement bringing an end to modern-day slavery.
And Jazz, I began to think about that. Like, wait, they were bought and sold for labor, bought and sold for sexual experimentation, bought and sold for sex, bought and sold for entertainment.
My ancestors are human trafficking victims. And so I realized, you know what? This fight is personal to me.
Project Mona's House goes above and beyond to restore what was seemingly lost for women who've been victimized. To quote her directly, Kelly says, "Women come in as victims and are transformed into survivors, but by the time they leave, they're overcomers."
So Project Mona's House is an initiative and program and movement to bring an end to modern day slavery, which is human trafficking. And so we have several different initiatives within that. And so Mona's outreach says, hey, we believe that the eyes don't see what the brain doesn't know. And so we work tirelessly to spread awareness.
The program has created movies, hosts one-on-one seminars, and offers free downloadable informational documents because they believe that the more people know, the better equipped they are to end it.
And then we have Mona's Group, which is a restoration group for women who've been victimized by human trafficking, entered the sex trade willingly, or have been victims of any form of like sexual abuse or assault. And then we have Mona's House, our restoration home specifically for women who've been victims of human trafficking.
Putting her mission where her mouth is, soon on March 4th, Kelly and her team will take part in what's called the Free Them Walk, where she'll pay homage to enslaved people of the past and bring awareness to those of the present by walking 902 miles from Lynchburg, Virginia, all the way to Buffalo, using the Underground Railroad.
Again, we're just repeating history. Freedom seekers of the past knew that, hey, if I could just get to Buffalo, I'll be one step closer to freedom. And so we're telling people all around the United States that, listen, Buffalo is the hub for freedom. And I'm happy to be a part of that.
Coming up next, we sit down with a historian and educator who's been a key figure in helping preserve the history of African Americans in Western New York. Welcome back. Preserving African American history is crucial to the future. And here in Buffalo, we have someone who is like a walking encyclopedia of Black American history, especially as it relates to Western New York. Her name, Dr. Eva M. Doyle. She retired from Buffalo Public Schools 16 years ago, but Eva Doyle is still teaching folks in New York and around the world about their history. And just as before, she's paying to get her lessons across. Every year for the last 7 years, she posts a billboard along Michigan Avenue at her own expense.
So I said, now, what other things can I do to get this information out to not only the African American community, but the entire Western New York area?
Those other things Dr. Eva Doyle has been doing. That's Dr. Doyle after she received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Buffalo State College as she pursues her PhD. Dr. Doyle writes a column for the Buffalo Criterion, the oldest Black-owned newspaper in Western New York. The Buffalo News runs her column, Eye on History, every Sunday in February. Her column has also been printed in other newspapers around the country.
Because I'm not just educating the African American community, I'm educating people from all ethnic backgrounds. I think that's very important.
Dr. Doyle also just wrapped up a long stint hosting a radio talk show on WUFO, Western New York's only Black-owned radio station. But Doyle's pride and joy is the Freedom Wall, 28 chosen civil rights leaders from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malcolm X to local torchbearers such as former Deputy State Assembly Leader Arthur O. Eve and the late Common Councilman George Arthur.
Just to be in the presence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's on the wall, Rosa Parks, the mother of the Civil Rights Movement, who's on the wall, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for president in 1972.
Eva Doyle also regularly sponsors essay competition and a history bee and recognizes outstanding women in the community all on her dime, although she does get some support from sponsors, and her good works have been noticed.
She gives it to you straight and no chaser. You don't even know that you've been schooled.
Sandy White and Greg Barber are freelance journalists who are working on a documentary about Eva Doyle, a 2-year project.
She is a dedicated researcher, and people need to know the kinds of things that she has done because it can inspire other folks to go that extra mile to find out the facts, find the truth.
They've seen Eva Doyle in action, and for a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother who's supposed to be retired,
she has an unbelievable amount of energy and a desire which she taps into to teach.
Eva Doyle not only reveres history as a student and teacher, she wholeheartedly supports history as an economic engine for Buffalo, which is becoming a destination for cultural tourism. Doyle says the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor has so much potential and believes it's just a matter of time until it becomes a world attraction.
And hopefully when we're out of this pandemic, and I think we've learned a lot also, maybe we can all come together and create a better world for us all.
Straight ahead, back to the roots, the unique way one local Black-owned business is connecting the past to the future.
If you're looking for a Black business to support right here in the Queen City, we found the perfect one.
It's called Rooted in Black, and they're connecting the past with the future in a unique way. When Fee Bolden started indoor gardening, she created a simple black planter featuring the words, "Rooting for everyone Black with plants." An adapted quote from TV series creator Issa Rae, who on the 2017 Emmy Award red carpet commented, "I'm rooting for everybody Black." The last thing Fee thought when she made the planter for herself was that it would go viral.
And I just posted it on my personal Instagram page, and it so happened to go viral. and people were asking like, hey, are you selling that? And after so many people asked, I'm like, okay, I guess so. And literally like from there, it turned into a business pretty much overnight.
Today, Fee, her husband Alex, and her brother Emmanuel now fully operate the online store, which has garnered over 25,000 nationwide followers and record-breaking sales. They see to it that a portion of their proceeds go to COVID-19 hardship grants and help members of Western New York's mental health community. Additionally, Rooted in Black has a focus on educating.
When people think of Rooted in Black, we definitely want them to connect Black people in gardening, and also giving how our platform has bloomed. We also see it as a vehicle of education.
Since she's a history buff, many of their pots list great Black icons from varying fields and walks of life, like the one with the Black foremothers, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ida B. Wells. Fee also has plans to expand her inventory from right here in Buffalo with things like custom bookmarks.
You can check out Fitz Books and Waffles because he has some there. You can get one complimentary with the purchase of a book. We're also creating postcards. We're going to have things like journals for like your gardening and personal on the way that will include some of these elements of history and gardening and plants as well.
Coming up next, we'll take you inside the home of Reverend J. Edward Nash, one of the most well-known and widely respected African Americans in Western New York.
We're taking a walk back through history to the mid-1800s.
That's when Reverend J. Edward Nash moved to Buffalo from Virginia to become the pastor of the Michigan Street Baptist Church.
And he and his family settled right here in this house. It's now the location of the Nash House Museum. Inside the Nash House Museum, you'll find hundreds of artifacts from the mid-1800s, like this Victrola, old kitchen appliances, and dozens of books, all from the life of Reverend J. Edward Nash and his family. Nash was a pastor at the Michigan Street Baptist Church in the late 1800s. That was many years after the church's role in the Underground Railroad, for which it later became famous for.
Most African American ministers during that period of time would say, I was called to be a preacher, and you would get assigned to church, or you would go to a church and you would just begin to preach. But this man studied theology, went to school to become a minister.
His office was small, cozy, and filled with books.
He read everything, including the complete works of Shakespeare, and other things that he had in his collection. So he would sit at this desk, write out his sermon.
There's also several items from his wife Frances, including her church hats, sewing room, and a vintage oven.
And she was a very good baker as well. Baked cakes and pies up here that she often could sell to restaurants because they loved her cooking so well.
This house is one of several attractions along the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor.
So the commission serves as the connector of the past, present, and the future for those historic neighborhoods within and around this corridor, which is 3.5 miles of the corridor that we say begins right there at Williams Street with the Jesse Clipper Plaza, stakes all the way down to East Ferry, where our Freedom Wall is, the iconic Freedom Wall.
Right now, tours of the Nash House are done virtually online. In addition to the Nash House, some of the other attractions on the corridor include the Colored Musicians Club and the Michigan Street Baptist Church. There is a wealth of Black history right here in Western New York.
And this has been a look back at the legacy and contributions of African Americans, past, present, and future.
Thank you for joining us for our Honoring Black History special.